We made an executive decision to go back to Felbrigg Hall today and see the insides as they opened at noon, and we had a bit of a late start this morning. Let's blame the coffee cake that we had last night, shall we? It kept Mum and I up until an unreasonable hour of the morning, which was about 2 a.m. So, what else can I tell you about Felbrigg? Well, these are the interiors that you're looking at now. They're going to go by fairly quickly, and I'm going to be talking for a while. Anyways, so the estate dates back to the Norman conquest and was enlarged by the Felbrigg family. The Felbrigg has Danish connections, and it's Scandinavian for plank bridge, if you needed to know. This area was recorded in the Domesday Survey of 1086 and was a possession of the Bigod family. The Felbriggs in the 11th century were married to the Bigods, and the first Sir Simon de Felbrigg is thought to have died in 1351. The Felbrigg family held the hall until the Lancastrian coup of 1399, when he died, and his will stated that Felbrigg would be sold. The home passed to the Norfolk Wyndhams in the mid-15th century, and this line died out in 1599. The Somerset branch of the Wyndham family were there between 1621 and 1624. Sir John Wyndham and his son Thomas constructed the south front out of the remains of the early Tudor building. And then we're going to skip about 100 years there, so forgive me. William Wyndham II went on a grand tour from 1738 to 1742 and spent some time living in Rome. He employed James Payn to remodel Felbrigg, and the current dining room installed where the old staircase once stood. He also built a room to display the art and objects he collected on his grand tour. This is actually the most complete grand tour collection in England, and part of the entrustment to the National Trust is that this grand tour collection must stay together in its completeness, because it is thought to have been the most complete in all of England. And so it has to stay in the hall, and they can't sell off bits and pieces of it. And I think that's about enough of Felbrigg Hall for now. And if you want to know more, you can listen to yesterday, or you know where Google is. But yesterday does give you a really quick overview of Felbrigg. So off to Blickling we go. welcome to Blickling. We arrived at the parking lot and saw this beautiful E-Type Jaguar is the first thing out of the car. Blickling Hall is a Jacobean-style stately home with approximately 5,000 acres of parkland and a loop of the River Bur running through it. The mansion was built on the ruins of a Tudor building for Sir Henry Hobart in 1616 and designed by Robert Lyminge, Lyminge. The library contains one of the most historically significant collections of manuscripts and books in England of around 13,000 to 14,000 volumes. Two ladies were busy cataloguing some of the old books, and honestly, I could have sat with them for the rest of the week. Fascinating, beautiful Aesop's fables that one of them was handling. So sweet. The property was then passed to the National Trust in the 1940s, similar to Felbrigg Hall, due to no further successors to the house. The 15th century Blickling was in the possession of Sir John Fastolf of Caister in Norfolk. He made his fortune in the 100-Year War, and his coat of arms is still on the property. Later, the property went to Thomas Boleyn, later Earl of Wiltshire, and his wife Elizabeth. They lived there between 1499 and 1505. The exact dates of the births of their children are unknown, but it is likely that Mary, George, and Anne Boleyn were all born at Blickling. There's a rather gorgeous carved wooden statue of Queen Anne Boleyn and her daughter, Queen Elizabeth I, on display in the front hall. And it was believed that they went to London because of Anne's mother Elizabeth's ill health, and Hever in Kent was closer, but don't quote me here. The House of Blickling today was built on the old Boleyn property in the reign of James I by Sir Henry Hobart, Lord Chief Justice of the Common Pleas. Slightly more recently, the house was requisitioned during the Second World War and served as an officers' mess to RAF Wolterton. There was an RAF museum exhibit that you could visit on the property, and this explained that even though in 1940 the National Trust had care of the house, it was still used for RAF servicemen and women as billets in Nissen huts, which have since been taken down. Officers were staying in the house, and the lake adjacent was actually used to practice dinghy drills. This museum is a tribute to RAF pilots and crew, and it's got various sentimental bits and pieces, pictures, miniatures of planes, technology that was used. Very neat. And at the end of the war, the house was de-requisitioned, and the National Trust let it to tenants until 1960, when the Trust began to restore the house to reflect its history and opened it to the public in 1962. right, be forewarned. You're not actually going to see Wolterton Hall, a picture, not the insides, nothing, but we're going to talk about Wolterton Hall anyways. There's the entry gate to Wolterton. It had a bunch of signs on it that said private property, private driveway, CCTV in use, uh, you know, and I got a bit worried that someone might come out with a shotgun. And so this is the closed gate. There was a gate. We followed the wall round and found an open gate, and we did drive through the open gate. I'm sure the open gate would have taken us to the house, but I was very worried with all the CCTV and use signs that someone might come out with a shotgun. Anyways, Wolterton Hall was fairly recently sold out of the family and was brought a bit more, I think, up to date by those that bought it, and it is currently back on the market for a mere £25 million. So check your pockets, your seat cushions, anything else you might know where £25 million is hiding, so that you can buy a beautiful Wolterton Hall. This hall also ties into the hall that we are about to go to, along with a hall we are going to tomorrow. So it does fit in, I promise. We're not just doing this for the sake of it. So Wolterton Hall was once occupied where it is now. It was once an old manor house owned by Sir Henry Spelman, and the village of Wolterton, which was abandoned, leaving only the remains of the parish church, which the remains are still there and you can go and visit, but we didn't. The first Baron Walpole of Wolterton was Horatio Walpole. He acquired the estates at Wolterton in 1722, which he renovated. He was the younger brother of Sir Robert Walpole, the first Earl of Orford, who is regarded as the first Prime Minister of England and who is credited with Houghton Hall we know today, but you'll see that in tomorrow's video. Horatio was also a politician and had been ambassador of France, living in Paris between 1724 and 1730. Unfortunately, his plans for Wolterton were changed when a fire destroyed the structure, and Thomas Ripley was hired to figure out how to rebuild. Thomas Ripley had also been hired by Robert to redesign Houghton Hall. Wolterton is a Georgian-style home with a ground floor Portland stone ground floor, and then the floors above are pale red brick. Horatio, the third Earl and great-grandson of Horatio Walpole, inherited the hall and made many alterations to it. A new Palladian wing was added, and Portland stone arcade was added, and various other modifications were made. And I suppose that's enough on that, as we didn't go inside or even see the outside. So have a Google of Wolterton Hall, if you will. And this takes us on to Mannington Hall. Mum booked us a private tour at Mannington Hall. It was privately booked. There was about 20 of us. It was from 6 to 8 p.m. and a bit of a change for us as we don't normally stay out this late. We were greeted with champagne or elderflower with raspberry and lime, which was very nice. Oh, and some mint. And we got some lovely little canapes, which was just lovely. Look at this sheep. I got distracted by the sheep. The tour of the house lasted an hour. It lasted the kind of full 2 hours, and genuinely, we only got to see 3 rooms, unless you count the library as a fourth room. But the library was tiny. There's a picture of me sneaking my head in the library. They all still live there, and it was a great change for the evening. So, this moated medieval country house was an absolute delight to visit. The first manor house built on this site was constructed in the 15th century, having been owned by the Walpole family since the 18th century. It is now the seat of Robert Walpole, the 10th Baron Walpole. Now this gets a bit wrong because he's dead now. Anyways, at some point they lost the title of Earl as there were no sons to pass it on to, so they're now only barons. We weren't allowed to take many pictures in Mannington as it is privately owned for insurance purposes, so we're back to some driving around and driving back to East Dunham for the evening. The Potts family purchased the estate from the Lumner family in 1585. John Potts was a member of Parliament for Norfolk and was knighted by King Charles I and made a baronet. Potts, even though he was favoured by King, was a very strict parliamentarian and became great friends of Oliver Cromwell's. Unfortunately, in 1720, the Potts family fortunes were ruined with the collapse of the South Sea Company, and he lived at Mannington Hall until 1736 when his wife passed away. They had no children, and due to money troubles, the manor and township were all purchased by Horatio Walpole, who also at the time had Wolterton Hall next door. Portraits of both Robert and Horatio hang in the sitting room of Mannington, which we got to see. And when Horatio purchased Mannington for £20,000, he was fixing up Wolterton and had a plan to use Mannington as either a dower house or a farmhouse. But he put very little work into the hall and it remained pretty unaltered from the time of the Potts. Mannington eventually became the main home to the Walpoles, and when Horatio's great-great-grandson, Horatio, the 4th Earl of Orford, inherited both estates in 1858, he had great interest in antiquity and Gothic architecture and thought that it would make a better family home versus the more formal house at Wolterton, and they moved and began to make improvements. Robert, the 5th Earl and the last Earl of Orford, lived at Mannington from 1895 to 1905 when he moved back to Wolterton. Mannington was then let to a consulting dental surgeon, Sir Charles Tomes, who added a few of his own bits and pieces to the house, like he tiled the grate fire in the sitting room with blue and white Delft tiles, removed some of the stained glass, which has since been put back by those currently living there. And then in 1931, the estates of Wolterton and Mannington were left to Robert, the 9th Baron Walpole, who lived in Wolterton until 1969, with his son living at Mannington. Robert Horatio Walpole became the 10th Baron Walpole on the death of his father in 1989, and he died there himself in 2021. So this was the 11th Baron of Walpole, Jonathan Robert Hugh Walpole. I believe it was his wife that showed us around the house, which was such a lovely evening. And that's probably more than you really ever needed to know, but there's some more Walpoles for you, and you get to hear about the Walpoles again in the next one. So we'll talk to you then. Toodaloo.